My brother had me declared mentally incompetent to steal my inheritance, so I spent 3 years planning his downfall. The day I walked out of that courthouse 3 years ago, I knew my life had fundamentally changed forever. My own brother had just convinced a judge that I was mentally incompetent to manage my affairs, and in one swift legal motion, he'd seized control of the $2 million inheritance our grandfather left us both. The worst part wasn't even the money itself, though that stung like hell, but the fact that everyone in that room believed his lies about my mental state. I'd been going through a rough patch after losing my job and dealing with some anxiety issues, sure, but nothing that warranted having my basic rights stripped away. My brother had carefully documented every moment of weakness, every bad day, every time I'd seemed scattered or overwhelmed during those difficult months. He'd twisted normal human struggles into evidence of incompetence, and the system had bought it completely. Walking down those courthouse steps, I felt something shift inside me that I'd never experienced before. It wasn't just anger or disappointment, but a cold, calculating determination that seemed to settle into my bones. My brother thought he'd won, thought he'd outsmarted me and secured his future at my expense. He had no idea that he'd just awakened something in me that would consume the next 3 years of my life. The first few months were the hardest because I had to pretend to accept what had happened while secretly beginning to plan. I moved into a small apartment across town, took a job at a warehouse, and started living the kind of quiet, unremarkable life that wouldn't draw attention. Every evening after work, I'd sit at my kitchen table with a notebook, carefully documenting everything I knew about my brother's life, his habits, his weaknesses, his secrets. See, growing up together meant I knew things about him that no one else did, and over the years, he'd confided in me about mistakes he'd made, corners he'd cut, and rules he'd bent. I started reaching out to old friends, former colleagues, anyone who might have information about his business dealings. I was patient, methodical, never pushing too hard or asking too many questions at once. The breakthrough came about 6 months in when I discovered that my brother had been using our grandfather's money for more than just personal expenses. He'd been funneling chunks of it into a side business he'd been running without reporting it properly to the IRS. The numbers didn't add up, and the more I dug, the more inconsistencies I found in his financial records. But I knew that wasn't enough on its own, so I kept digging deeper. I spent weekends following him, learning his routines, understanding how he operated. I watched him meet with people at coffee shops, take phone calls in his car, conduct business in ways that seemed deliberately secretive. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of someone who wasn't quite as clean as he'd presented himself to be in court. The second year was when I started building my case more actively. I'd learned enough about legal procedures during my own competency hearing to understand what kind of evidence would be compelling.